Welcome everybody to this month's First Fridays at Fusion Studio. My name is Rich Dione. I am the co-director of the Fusion Studio for Entertainment and Engineering here at Purdue University. We are here once again in the John Martinson Entertainment and Engineering Labs at Purdue's campus, which is a great place for us to be. You can ignore the devil head behind me. It's just part of our animatronics classes. I'm thrilled to welcome today Heather McAvoy. She's here to talk about the evolution of lighting system design, which is going to be a really cool conversation, I think. She's the owner of Heather McAvoy Design, an independent theater consulting and lighting design practice. In over 38 years of practice, she's consulted on more than 250 projects. Favorites include the Thomas Theater at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, the Mandell Weiss Forum at La Jolla Playhouse, and Portland Center Stage at the Armory, to name a few. She's going to do a little PowerPoint presentation. I say little, I mean short, not in terms of diminutive of value. It's going to be a great PowerPoint presentation. Feel free to populate questions in the chat during that, and I'll raise them with Heather if there's an opportunity. Otherwise, we'll hold the questions to the end. We'll do a little conversation back and forth about some of her presentation, but that's a great time to share questions that you might have about her presentation, about her work. I suppose you could ask why the sky is blue, but I'm not sure that we have a good answer, and we'll go from there. That sounds good to everybody else. Welcome, Heather. Thanks for being here.
I'm here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. I think we're just going to turn it right over to you and let you start sharing your screen, and I'll go quiet for a little bit.
Okay. I'm going to talk a little bit about, am I successfully sharing? Yeah, looks good.
Yes, you are. You're good.
Okay. I'm going to talk a little bit about lighting systems design as it has evolved during my career. I'm not going to go back to the beginning of time. Although I did start doing this when dinosaurs roamed the earth. I'm not going to talk about limelight or resistance boards or even this auto transformer board that I only saw 8 years ago. Although I have encountered these in my career, not limelight. But when doing renovations of buildings, I have come across all kinds of interesting old stuff that we no longer use. I started my career in 1981 as a lighting designer, and I became a theater consultant in 1986. So I've seen a lot of changes, and I want to just hit some highlights of trends that I've seen and the milestones along the way. When I started, well, what we were getting rid of were power distribution systems that were based on patching. Circuits distributed to the location, to the lighting positions, but then patched through some kind of a patch panel, a telephone, retractable cord, slider interconnect system, which is the kind of system that I experienced when I was an undergraduate. At that time, these systems were going away because something new and wonderful had happened, and that was called dimmer per circuit. CD80 dimmers that were created by Century Strand, invented in 1980, hence the name. And so when I started laying out lighting systems in 1986, this is what we were doing. We were distributing circuits as before, but they were all home run instead of a patch panel directly to the dimmer racks. And did a lot of lighting system renovations during that era, taking out patch panels and just using the old patch panel as some kind of a junction box or a terminal box to distribute the existing wire and conduit back to a centralized dimmer rack location. So one of the things that we would do with these distributed dimmer per circuit systems is you could duplicate circuits in locations that didn't get used very often. So you could leverage the use of the limited number of dimmers that you had, and of course cost and power, primarily cost would be driving how many dimmer racks you could have. And most of the dimmer racks were a full-size dimmer rack was 96 circuits, although Colortran and EDI and maybe some others made racks that were more densely, like the Colortran Dimension 192. It was a 4 quad dimmer module, so you get 192 circuits in a rack instead of 96. But the problem was when one of those modules went out, you lost 4 dimmers instead of 2. But the next change that I saw was in terms of distributing power, was distributed dimming. And Gordon Perlman, he developed with entertainment technology the IGBT silent dimming technology, and created what we affectionately called a dimmer on a stick. And instead of having your dimming in a centralized dimmer room, you could bring the dimming to the lights because the dimming was silent. And that still exists today. There are still Strand and ETC, but well, Verilight, I guess we should call Strand. They both make individual dimmer modules that can be mounted on a light fixture. And that works really well these days if you're working with a client that has a large existing inventory of tungsten equipment and they're moving towards LED, but they can't really go all the way. You can supplement the system with this. So distributed small dimmer packs or bars, ETC Smart Bar product, most of which are now discontinued. I actually just worked on a project helping some high school students with our local high school here, doing a show, and they have a system that only went in about 12 years ago. And the equipment is all in pristine condition because they had the pandemic. They don't use it a lot. They do the big musical once a year. So the equipment is all brand new, but it's all essentially obsolete. It's entirely smart bars that are all functioning just fine. But we've moved on already. So now we're here. We're here where we're distributing power and data. We no longer have centralized power systems. We're distributing DMX often through a lighting network to intelligent fixtures with an LED source. We don't have dimmer racks, dimmer rooms. I would say it was probably about 10 years ago, maybe a little longer, when I first was involved in a project that went all LED. It was a high school in San Diego County. At our ASTC, American Society of Theatre Consultants, I'll give a plug for them. This is the professional organization of theater consultants in North America. We did a forum in Los Angeles in 2014, and our theme was new technologies. So that's 11 years ago. And by new technologies then, we meant LEDs and projection and LED panel systems and virtual scenery. And it's amazing how fast that technology has progressed. So we need less power. We need to distribute power differently because power can be daisy chained between LED fixtures. And we also have the advantage with these new systems is you can use non-theater sites, spaces that have not been equipped with the kind of power and power distribution that most theaters have. You can use this technology there. I'll give an example of a project that I just worked on, and actually it's still running in San Francisco. It's a dance piece that I worked with one of my NYU buddies, Ken Smith, as a co-designer to do a 55-minute dance piece in a space that it was originally a warehouse space, and then it was an architect's office, and now it's a very busy dance studio. They're not really set up for performance, but they'd like to be. And we put together a system that was essentially a kit of parts. We had, I might have a slide on this actually. Let me skip forward. No, do I? Yeah, here's what we did with this. We had a selection of LED fixtures, fixed focus, color source V spots. They were controlled wirelessly via City Theatrical Show Baby transmitter. We had 6 moving lights, moving wash fixtures that were in a DMX daisy chain. We had 1 tungsten Source 4. It's actually in my collection. ETC loaned it to me when the Source 4 first came out, which was, oh my gosh, more than 30 years ago. I still have it. We needed 1 more light to just put an architectural kind of a slash across the back wall of the space. So we put that in, and we had a little portable 4x600-watt dimmer pack. There's in the set for this dance piece right there in the middle, there's a practical that's basically a par 38 hanging from a socket. That's also through the portable dimmer pack. We put all of this stuff together. It's all controlled by an ETC ion in a space that didn't really have the infrastructure for theatrical lighting. So I think that we're in an exciting era where all of this stuff is available to us from a lot of different sources, and we can put together something that really works well in a space that doesn't have the infrastructure for it. I'm just going to talk quickly about control systems. I think most folks know the history. When I started, we were still using multi-scene preset consoles and preset boards. The first show I ever ran was at Ward Leonard 10-scene 60 dimmer preset board, which was a character building experience. But right after that, the venue that I grew up in my undergraduate university, we got a light palette. And that was really exciting that now we had a computer board and I got to program it. I've got some of the history here on the screen that's, I think, all pretty well known. The first one was the EDI LS8 in a chorus line in 1975. That was designed by Gordon Perlman. The light palette came out in 1978, and it was first used on Beatlemania, which I actually saw when I was in high school. And it was maybe that launched me into my theater career, I don't know, and the Kliegel Performer. And then, of course, the development of DMX 512, which wasn't prevalent when I started consulting. Everybody had their own proprietary protocols, so your light board could talk to your dimmers, but nobody else's. And DMX 512 just revolutionized the ability for manufacturer X equipment to talk to manufacturer Y equipment. So now we can talk to all kinds of peripherals and effects equipment and moving lights. And then, of course, the evolution, the light palette was kind of the grandfather of, and the Kliegel Performer of the PC baseboards that we use now, like the ETC EOS series, the Grand MA, etc. So I talked about this already. Now we've got LEDs distributed. We're distributing DMX often via lighting network and wireless control systems, which I just got to use on this project. So that's kind of my quick overview of all of the different milestones in my career. But I do have a quick story about fixtures, because we all remember when something important in history happened. And I remember when the ETC Source 4 came out, which of course revolutionized with their new optical system and the ability to be brighter at a lower wattage. At the time, that was a huge big deal. And I always remember that it was 1992 at LDI in Dallas, because my older son was born in 1992, and I took him as a nursing mother to LDI, and we went to look at the Source 4, which was being shown in a hotel room in a shootout with other fixtures. And my husband and I walked into the room with this baby, and it was crowded and people were talking, and my son Thomas, he took one look at the room and he started to scream. So I handed him to my husband, and my husband took him out, and so I stayed in so I could see the shootout. And I think it's interesting that he's my one son who didn't go into theater, but at any rate, those are the things that I have experienced, and I'd be curious to hear what your questions are. So I'm going to stop sharing and let you throw me some questions.
Yep. Heather, that was fantastic. I did not expect to be taken down my own trip down memory lane as you gave your presentation, but just to sort of parallel some of what you were talking about, I was in undergrad from 92 to 96, and the theater that I was in that theater department was built in 1955. So we still had an analog patch panel in the upstage right corner. And there was a pair of CD80 temporary dimmer packs there connected with an analog multiplex signal. And I remember distinctly soldering the connector on this like 16 or 18 pin, whatever it was, AMX connector. But while I was there, we got a whole new inventory of ETC Source 4 fixtures, which were the new hot thing on the block. And in 96, that theater had a renovation with got all new sensor dimmer racks. That patch panel came out. And then maybe 5 years later, I remember going to, I think, Four Wall in New York for an LED fixture shootout and walking away going, there's no way, this is never going to be a thing. It's never going to, too dim, not going to do anything. This is crazy. And here we are now, right?
Yeah.
Everything.
Stock tips from you.
Yeah, right. Yeah, listen to me. Don't buy Apple. That's never going to be anything. Here we are now, right? LEDs are the thing. They are bright enough. They're agile enough to do the things we want to do, and we have moved so far from distributed dimming to distributed control, and that's a really interesting shift. And I remember trying to put together, when I was in college, this weird little show in a community theater that had no lighting, and like buying clip lamps and Radio Shack wireless home lighting control things to try to make it work. We don't have to do that anymore, and that's kind of wild. I do want to point out Mitch has correctly reminded us all that DMX 512 went through some revisions many times over the years, but most recently it looks like in 2024. And you're going to see me squinting. You're all seeing them. My eyes are bad. But my colleague and good friend Mary Pilot has shared. First, thank you for your presentation, Heather. There is so much new technology in the lighting side of things, as you mentioned. As someone who started working in lighting in the late 80s, I find it an area that allows for both great engineering as well as creativity. Yet, undergraduates rarely think about going into lighting as a pathway. Do you have any insights or advice you could give students who have never considered lighting as a pathway? And forgive me for giving some context to Mary's question. Mary is one of my colleagues from engineering, and her work was with like Philips Lighting, so the industry side of lighting engineering and technology. So that may be a part of her context, because I do know we have a lot of students who like to go into lighting design, but the lighting technology piece is her question. So I'll put that to you.
Well, that's an interesting question, because I know so many lighting designers that I just think everybody's in lighting design because they're all around me. Why would you not go into lighting design? I'm going to go with the example of my NYU classmates. My class, which was the class of '86, was a particularly large class. And I found it interesting how each person has sort of blazed their own trail. Some folks, like Clifton Taylor, who was in my class, he has had an amazing career, well known for teaching particularly about color in light. He's written a really good book about color in light. He's been Mr. Dance. He's done a ton of dance. He's taught at North Carolina School of the Arts. He's just pieced together this really vibrant career in lighting. Another good friend, well, several good friends went into architectural lighting. Steve Rosen and
Sure.
who was the year behind me. They are both with Available Light, and they've taken their excitement about the visible spectrum into the architectural world, and they've had amazing careers doing that. And then I've had other friends who my friend Paul Palazzo, he's done primarily industrials, more, event and conference and convention based lighting. I went into theater consulting. I think that there are a lot of different paths that you can take with lighting design. My youngest son I mentioned to Rich before we started, is a sound designer. He just graduated from Yale, proud Yale mom. Anyway, there are so many different paths that you can take from that in sound design.
Yeah.
That's comforting as a mother. I think that theater education in general is a good way to build people with skills and creativity and flexibility. So whether it's sound design or scenic design or technology, I think any of these paths can lead to a rewarding career in a lot of different ways.
I appreciate that answer, and I tend to agree. I also find it interesting when you meet people that you don't know very well. Like, we have only met for the first time really today, Heather, but you've listed people multiple times now that are interconnected, right? I did design many shows with Steve Rosen about 20 years ago when he was still doing theater work. So it's just so great to have that happen. I think, to sort of build on Mary's question, if I could, a little bit, there are definitely lots of students interested in design at the undergraduate level and then branching off to other things there. But as Mary and I have seen over the years, trying to get students interested, or talking to students who are interested in the engineering side of the entertainment industry, they gravitate towards scenic automation. They gravitate towards audio engineering and technology. But we rarely get students who show up and say, I want to learn about control protocols and distributed dimming or something like that. And I wonder, I'm just going to ask the question, I guess, is that because do you think lighting is, that those parts of the technology of lighting are sort of transparent to the casual participant? Like, it's hard to, you turn lights on and off all the time in your home, right? And so they're just lights you turn on and off in a theater. Is that, I don't know, is that a fair assessment?
Yes, you could say it's kind of an obscure field because
Yeah.
people, even though people experience light all the time, they don't think about it, and they're not trained in
Yeah.
what does it mean? What is the visible spectrum? What is electromagnetic radiation? What are all of those things? But I think that it's an important profession because it influences the way people experience, whether you're in architectural lighting, and the way people experience spaces, their workspace. My office right now, which is a mixture of daylight and my task lamp and reflection from my screen. And how does it make you feel? How does it make you buy stuff in the store because of the way it's lit, and then this dance piece I talked about earlier is about a gentleman named Bill Clark who has been incarcerated for about 30 years for murders that he did not commit. And how does the lighting and the movement in that dance piece evoke emotion, encourage action? It is esoteric and hard to explain, but it's also incredibly rewarding. So
yeah,
we just need to talk about it more.
I think you're right. I think that's exactly it. And I'm reflecting on your slide deck, and some of the things that you mentioned, I'm realizing we could spend multiple weeks on in a class about the technology, right? The introduction of the Source 4 and the advances in the optics, right? The introduction of the silent IGBT dimmers. And again, there's a lot to talk about there, or the work that ETC and other companies are doing now in trying to create diode arrays that project more of a full spectrum of colors instead of these spikes in specific color frequencies, right? Without piling on 8,000 diodes at that like there's so much interesting engineering and technology and science there. You could spend weeks on any one of those, and they're sort of transparent to the end user.
There's a lot
I
of
clearly
LED lighting out there because now LEDs, they're cheap. You can get disco lights anywhere. And it makes me appreciate it when I see really good quality lighting, thoughtful lighting, because there's so much kind of yucky stuff out there.
Yep, you're exactly right. Yeah, I'm now thinking about the challenges in creating the blue LED and how that had an impact on all of this, right? We had talked before, I'm going to shift gears a little bit. We had talked before everybody had joined us about how the theater at Oregon Shakes is one of your favorite projects to work on as a consultant. And you're grinned, so that tells me you have a lot that you could sort of go on and on about there. So I'd just love to hear about that project. What makes it your favorite? What was so fun about it? Just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, taking off my lighting design hat and putting on my theater consulting hat.
Yeah.
Reason that is whenever anybody asks, because I get asked that question a lot these days, which I guess is a late career sort of question. Is it what's your favorite project and why is it a project that I did 20 years ago? It's because of the process of that project. The Oregon Shakespeare Festival at that time, Libby Apple was the artistic director, Paul Nicholson was the executive director, and there was a vision to create to replace an existing venue called the Black Swan, which was a black box that was actually in a former car dealership, and a kind of a make-do with a low ceiling space. And of course, they did great theater in that space, but they wanted to have a better space. And we were brought on board, the Landry and Bogan, were brought on board due to a long-term relationship between Paul Landry, who was one of my theater consulting mentors, and Richard Hay, who was the principal scenic designer for the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. And if folks know Richard, I think I'm going to say he's pushing 95 or 96. I might think he'll be 96 this year. He was instrumental in the design of quite a number of theaters, particularly in the Western US, down at the Old Globe, at Denver Center, and all of the venues at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. And it was a privilege to get to work with him. So we were hired at the very beginning by the festival to develop the program, which is sort of it's the Bible for the design of the building. And what is the purpose of the project? What spaces do they want? And what they do at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival is somewhat unique, and they're still doing genuine rotating multiple shows in the same venue, and they have 3 venues. So their staff was very specific about what they needed and how they worked, and they really wanted to be in a design relationship with folks who wanted to hear what they had to say about what they wanted, as opposed to telling them. I mean, the joke about theater consultants is that sometimes they kind of ride in on their white steed with their saber and say, we're going to fix your venue, or we're the pros. And these folks really wanted somebody to collaborate with them. And so we were privileged to stay with the project from the very beginning, all the way through assisting them in the process of hiring an architect. They chose Thomas Hacker and Associates from Portland, who had very little experience designing theaters, but did an excellent job of listening and designing for the very specific site and designing for the very specific use of the space. And Richard Hay was in charge of the design of the theater interior space itself. So he was really the catalyst for how this flexible space played out. And then we helped design we were the theater consultant designing all of the theatrical systems throughout the design process. And then I was the project manager for the project and was on site frequently during the construction, and then all the way to attending opening night, and seeing the venue perform. And I've been up there quite a few times since then, and seen it in a lot of different configurations. It's a flexible space. I think it ranges in seating from about 250 to about 360. And they can do, it was originally, we laid it out for arena, a three-quarter thrust, and an avenue configuration. I think that they have done, I've been there and seen other configurations they've done. It's fully trapped. And because the building is built on a hill, you load in at the top. There's a gala lift to get scenery from load and materials down to the stage, and then down to the trap room. And then they have storage at the very bottom, because they need to store seating banks when they're not in arena configuration and using all the seats. They got to store those. And they have to store 3 shows, the 2 that are in performance and the 1 that's in rehearsal. So it was a lot of fun. I worked with Stu Kotz, who was their longtime lighting director, Michael Magg, who was their master electrician and now resident lighting designer, in terms of developing the lighting catwalk positions, the layout of the system. Of course, the system was laid out for mostly tungsten, so I'm sure they've changed it since. Dawn Chang came as one of the designers who worked in the space. She looked over our shoulders. We wanted to get lighting designers who were actually going to use the space and had worked for the festival to look at the decisions what we were making. So she was a helpful another set of eyes. And it was just an incredibly rewarding experience. And I've done other projects that I absolutely loved, but for some reason that is the one that is kind of like my baby. So
I appreciate that, and I appreciate the fact that in your reflection you kind of identify that a big part of that reason is the process and the people. You know, as somebody who teaches both theater students and engineering students, right? Sometimes there's always a tension between the technical skills and the soft skills, the so-called soft skills. I don't particularly like that term, but the how do you collaborate? How do you communicate? How do you listen? How do you share information and overcome differences of opinion? And when it works, right? When you've got a group that just gels and everybody seems to be going in the same direction and firing on all cylinders, that does make a project 1,000 times better. And I think that sounds like that was your experience, right?
yes, absolutely. Because, you know, I've worked on bigger venues. I've worked on more expensive venues, but it was definitely the process and the people and the quality of the work that they do in there. I mean, educational theater is extremely important. Don't get me wrong, but I've worked on some really great projects for educational institutions from middle school through college and even places with MFA programs, and then gone to see a show in the space and thought, wow, we did all this work and this is what they're going to do here.
You're not wrong, right? So the other hat that I wear here at Purdue is I'm the chair of the Department of Theater and Dance, and we have this conversation often. And it's a tension and educational theater that sometimes we have to go ahead and let them put really, really ugly stuff on stage. Because it's a lot of students are just like I was when I was a student. I believe that I'm right until I see I'm wrong. And you can tell me I'm wrong as much as you like, but until I do it and it gets up there and it is ugly or bad or wrong, then right. So that is, I have to imagine that's got to be a really difficult tension for somebody who has helped to design a beautiful space with amazing capabilities and to see it not fulfill all of those expectations. Is that
Yes. Well,
a
and
fair
one
statement?
good lesson that I learned once was I did a performing arts center for a K through 12 school district. And my niece went to their Arts Magnet middle school, and they were doing Into the Woods, junior. And she said, "Oh, my Auntie Heather can do the lighting." And well, of course, Eva, I'm going to do that for you. And then I designed the lighting for a musical in a space, with a lighting system that I had designed. And the project had been value engineered, and there weren't as many circuits. I should have put more circuits on the psychoelectric. Of course, now you wouldn't need all those circuits because it would be all LED and everything would be fine. And they had cut one set of box booms, and they didn't. I'd asked them to move the second set, the set they were keeping, in order to get it in the right position, and it hadn't been moved. And I'm like, okay, well, now I'm living with all of those choices. So that was a fun but slightly painful experience.
Sure. Yeah. Oh, that's an interesting story about being on the other side of that process. Fascinating. I don't want to put you out, call you out in an awkward way, and maybe it's too long ago to remember, but it sounds like when you talked about the space that Oregon Shakes, it was a found space to begin with. And one of the things you said in your presentation was we can do found spaces very differently and more easily now with the changes in technology. Is the project too far away for you to talk about what you might, it's sort of a weird thing to say, with what we know now, how might you have approached it differently?
Well, just to clarify that the Thomas Theater is a all new construction. It was replacing a venue that was a found space.
Gotcha.
They didn't, and one thing about a found space is that unless you can spend a lot of money, you can't make it taller, you can't make it wider. I mean, you in theater consulting and architecture, you have to get those kinds of things right because they're very difficult to change in the future. I think that what we've learned about technology is that if you have I mean, it's dead simple. If you've got conduit paths, if you've got places to put equipment, the building's going to be around for 50 to 100 years, but the technology is going to change. So thinking about the Thomas Theater, there were about 500 circuits in that space. And it's a relatively small space, but it was because they were going to have 3 shows. The light plot was a plot for 3 different shows. And I can't imagine, I got to go up there and find out. I can't imagine that they need all those circuits now. But
yeah, sure. With the proliferation of intelligent fixtures, right, and multicolor fixtures, you need fewer systems, you need fewer specials. Yeah.
Yeah.
I tell our lighting students that it's such a different world they live in now than what I lived in. We've got a proscenium theater. It's 36-foot across opening. We'll do a dance concert for modern dance every semester. Those used to be giant rigs because you're doing 8 dance performances and you need multiple systems and all. And I look up and I go, this can't be more than like 75 or 100 fixtures, but because each fixture can do so many things, it's just a wildly different world. And now I sound like an old guy telling kids to get off my lawn. So I'm going to turn to Mark, who has a question here. When you design a system for a theater, do you also design an initial house rig, right? Do you sort of provide or even just a sketch of what the lighting rig should look like?
Sometimes. And actually, over the years, there have been projects. There are often projects where there isn't a knowledgeable end user. So probably a high school, those kind of spaces. Those have been the ones where I have done light plots or designed a rep light plot. I used to work a lot with my good buddy Jim Holtquist, who now leads Schuler Shook's Melbourne, Australia office. He worked for Landry and Bogan when he was a fledgling theater consultant, and he's a lighting designer as well. And we would, if the client was interested in paying for it, we would develop a rep light plot for our educational clients. If you're working with an established college or university theater department or an established theater company like the Oregon Shakespeare Festival or La Jolla Playhouse, they're going to do their own thing. But we often specify equipment. I just last night finished a spec for a package for a theater company here in the Bay Area that is replacing a lot of their older equipment. And in order to help them figure out what they needed, I did have to kind of sketch out a little light plot for them, because put my master electrician hat on, and not only what do they need for their design, but how are they going to circuit it, and how much cable do they need, and how long, and all that fun stuff.
Sure. Sure. And it sounds like that can be an extra charge because it's extra time, but it is a thing that is sometimes provided. Sure. Absolutely. I'm looking back at your bio, and there's a couple of other venues that you mentioned that were kind of exciting projects. Do you mind talking about the Mandell Weiss Forum at La Jolla Playhouse, that project a little bit?
For those familiar with La Jolla Playhouse, it's on the campus of University of California, San Diego. And their buildings they already had established venues. There was a gentleman named Mandell Weiss, and he gave a large sum, and he was quite late in life when he did that, and he did it with the contingent that he had to be there opening night, and he was in his 90s.
Wow.
The architect Antoine Predock, who's well known in the Southwest for his work, and designed them a space. They worked with Chris Perry, the late Chris Perry, who was a lighting designer for La Jolla Playhouse, and Ron Ranson, who was a professor for UC San Diego. And my primary role, that was pretty early in my career, was the design of the lighting system and the layout of the catwalks. And we went back and forth. Ron and I went back and forth about these catwalks. It's a thrust theater. And getting the location of all of the front of house. Well, they're not all front of house, all of the catwalks. We didn't do a tension wire grid. I don't recall why we didn't. Might be a good space for a tension wire grid. And another interesting aspect of that project was I don't know if you remember that Lee Colortran filed for Chapter 11 I think it was in the 90s, because they had some, I'm not gonna go deep into it, some legal issues, but they had developed a dimmer rack called the ENR rack. And the ENR rack was supposed to be, well, it had aluminum busing, and there were a couple of fires that were attributed to overheating of the racks. And so Colortran was a great company. They wanted to make things right, and they replaced a lot of the racks, which cost them a lot of money. But that project, for some reason, I still remember that was one of those projects that had the ENR racks that had to be replaced. But wow. Yeah, so that was a fun project. Although my recollection was that when it bid over, and by a certain amount, and that we had to do the whole design team had to do some redesign before it was simple. Sure.
Okay. So we've got about 10 or 15 minutes left. I want to remind folks that you can throw questions up on the Q&A or throw them in the chat if that's easier. Either works for us. When we were sort of prepping the technology before everybody joined us, Heather, you talked about your presentation and alluded to not looking at your crystal ball, but I might ask you if you don't mind sort of imagining what we might see next. Like, what are some of the trends that you're starting to hear whispers about, or that you're seeing as potentially impacting the design of lighting systems for theaters in the next 5 years or 10 years even?
Well, I had said earlier that having robust infrastructure is important, and conduit paths and all that. And I think we're going to actually move away from conduit paths, in that I think wireless technology is getting more robust, and I've always been hesitant to use it in a permanent installation because I don't know, you talk about lighting being esoteric, but having these signals flying around in the air, that's a little scary, and the potential for interference. And
Sure.
we want our productions to be absolutely uh, unbreakable. So I think I recently used wireless on that dance piece, thanks to my buddy Ken Smith, and it worked really well. And I was impressed at how well it worked, and how easy it was to configure. So I think that that's gonna make things even more flexible. I think we're gonna see more and more theater companies and performance events that are going to be in found spaces. And I think that they're going to that kind of technology is going to make those spaces easier to use. Things are expensive. People want to do more things that are site specific. Since the pandemic, people want to do more things that are outdoors. But 10 years from now, I assume there's going to be something absolutely brand new that I haven't thought of, because that's been true for the last 40. So
Sure, I appreciate that a lot, and I am like you. I've always been a little hesitant about wireless, right? For all sorts of reasons, but it is a far more. There are so many different wireless protocols that are far more robust than there used to be. So I think you're right. We'll probably see more of that. Heather has a question for you, Heather. She says, "Hi, Heather." I just wanted to make Heather a thing 3 or 4 times. Thanks so much for doing this. She says, "I'm a lighting design professor and I have students interested in the possibility of consulting. Coming from a theater background, are there skills or tools that she can help direct them towards if they're interested in pursuing this avenue in the industry?" And that's a great question. What are some things that we could help prepare students to do what you've done?
well, I think that a robust design training is a prerequisite for being a theater consultant. So that's one answer. Another more pragmatic answer is learn Revit. The architectural industry uses Autodesk products. All projects are being, really a project of any size is being drawn in Revit. And I think that theater planning firms are looking for folks that have those skills, or you're going to need to learn that once you start theater consulting. Most people who are theater consultants come from, I just did a little survey for a thing at USITT about the members of the ASTC and what their backgrounds are, because a friend of mine, my former professor, Michael Ramser, he asked me to do a talk about why lighting designers become theater consultants. And the truth is that I think I figured out that about 35% of the ASTC members actually came from some kind of technical design and production. And of those, I think 20% came from Yale's TD&P program. But said, I think I came up with 26% had come from lighting design. And I think because lighting designers interact with more parts of the building than, say, a set designer or a costume designer. So I think that understanding what people do in theaters, understanding not just how a technician uses a theater or a designer uses a theater, also how performers use a theater, how does the public interact with the building? All of those things are components of understanding how to put together a really quality facility. And then, of course, the technology. I mean, it's, as I illustrated in my presentation, everything changes, so you have to keep up. And how do you keep up? You go to conferences, you attend webinars, you talk to your friends who just did a show somewhere and what did they use? It's moving very fast, and keeping up with all the gear that's out there is a challenge, but it's something that we.
Sure. That last point is interesting to me as a professor. I'll pause that thought and I'll thumbs up Ian's message. Ian Hunter wrote "Yay Revit," so he and I spoke about that, I think, at our last First Friday We've talked multiple times at First Fridays, I think, about the challenges of figuring out what drafting tools to teach students. But absolutely what I hear over and over again is if that's the pathway you're headed towards, theater consultants, theater consultancy, Revit is the tool to learn. You know, I remember being in school, and even just hearing your presentation earlier, it reminded me, like, you sort of, when you're learning the material, you feel like you're learning the thing, right? And like everybody uses DMX to control lighting, and then it's not until later that you start to get the perspective that this is a snapshot in time of a single moment, and right now this is what it looks like. And I guess it's an important takeaway for those of us who are teachers.
Uh-oh, you froze. Rich, you froze. So I'm not hearing you right now. Rich,
Left here. I'm hoping you all can still hear me. Heather, are you there?
I can hear you now. Yeah, you froze for a minute. I don't know if it was me,
Yeah,
my country,
not
or
sure.
no.
We'll see. Had a really fun vamp in there about we're frozen and who knows what's going to happen. Who knows what other people saw? But I
Technology
was just talking about the.
count on it. No, I know where you're going with that. And what I love about this business is that there's always something new to try. There's always something new to learn. So, and I have experienced this is the way we've always done it. There's my husband and I used to talk about that guy. My late husband was a production manager for Stanford, and he did a lot of touring shows, and it was always really important to him, excuse me, to make sure that his venues were a platform for the artists to do the best that they
Mhm.
do, to put on their best show. And that means being flexible and adaptable. And you definitely cannot be stuck in one era. You just have to keep riding this wave as it
Yeah,
continues. It's ever changing.
absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's important for us, as those of us who are instructors and faculty, to be mindful of how we instill that perspective in students. I don't know how to do that. I'll have to figure that out myself, but I think it's an important part of what we do in the classroom. We have only a couple of minutes left, but I wanted to sort of toss one other hand grenade question at you, if I could. I appreciated you talking about how prior to 1986, there were a lot of different lighting protocols, most of them manufacturer specific, and then it sort of collapsed around DMX to allow for interconnectivity of different manufacturers. With the moment we're at now, we've been talking about ACN, Architecture for Control Networks, right? The Ethernet-based technology for decades, and that hasn't really been adopted. And there are a number of manufacturer-specific control protocols that go beyond DMX. Do you anticipate that at some point we'll see the same sort of convergence where, in order for I imagine it was a market-driven thing, right? People wanted to have some flexibility of who they purchased from, and so that drove this decision-making process. Do you see that happening, or not, or do you not want to comment on it?
One of the advantages of ACN and networks in general is that, especially in construction, is that people understand it. You know, electrical contractors, they install networks all the time. They don't necessarily understand DMX. DMX is very specific to our industry. So I have definitely held the hands of a lot of electrical contractors, especially when LED house lights started to be a thing. And now we were running DMX to architectural lighting fixtures, and electrical contractors who didn't understand DMX they weren't terminating properly. And
Mhm.
you know, Ethernet is something that they understand, and they're trained in how to manage the installation of those systems. So I do
Mhm.
think that eventually we're gonna go in that direction. And we're already distributing DMX over Ethernet, and companies already have nodes to translate from DMX through Ethernet to DMX to get to the fixtures. So I think it'll happen.
Yeah, yeah.
But DMX has gotten us really far. And
It's pretty robust.
Yes.
Right? It's a solid, robust protocol. Those folks in 1986, they did some good work figuring out how to make it happen.
Thanks, Mitch.
Yeah, thanks, Mitch. Well, Heather, thank you so much for your time today, and folks who were joining us, thank you for being part of this and for sharing your questions. This has been fantastic, and I'm excited to have had a chance to talk to you today and get to know you and hear a little bit about your work. As always, this will be up on our website probably by next week if folks want to share it with other folks. I want to let you all know that next month on May 2nd, we'll have Josh Groh, who's Senior Vice President for Studio Core Technology at Sphere Entertainment Company. He oversees the infrastructure that supports the Sphere Studio's core technology functions. We are talking about the Sphere in Vegas, if that's not clear to anybody. This includes architecting the digital pipeline from camera to screen, utilizing various software used to create content. His prior experience includes roles at Walt Disney Studios and Sony Pictures, ImageWorks. He's a Purdue alum. We're proud to share that, boiler up, with a Bachelor of Science degree in Mechanical Engineering and Technology with a focus on spatial animation. We're thrilled to have him join us next month. Also, just a reminder, if you haven't yet registered, you've missed the early bird deadline, but registration is still open for the symposium on education and entertainment and engineering. We'd love to see you all there. We have some great panels and discussions lined up. So sign up for that, and we'll see you in July. And just because it came up, David Schwinn says thank you to Heather. He says that you are one of his favorite consultants. And that you know how to collaborate. So
Nice work with David.
So that is a fantastic way to end this session with colleagues finding each other that way. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you again, Heather. This is great. I hope we get to meet in person sometime soon, and then we will see everybody next time. Thanks, y'all.
Bye-bye.